They say you only see someone's true face when they're cornered. For 12 years, I thought I knew my husband completely, his voice, his smile, his secrets. Or maybe I only knew the version he wanted me to believe in. My name is Claire. And until last year, I lived a life people called perfect. A steady marriage, a beautiful home, a man who told me every night that I was his world. But perfection is often just a curtain. And behind ours, the truth was rotting. The morning it all began, the sky hung low and gray, not stormy, not calm, just heavy. I stood in the kitchen making his coffee, the way I always did. 2 sugars, 1.5 creams. He smiled when I handed it to him, kissed me on the forehead, and said he'd be late because of meetings. I smiled back, pretending I didn't notice that his eyes no longer met mine. That night, he didn't come home. I called. Once, twice, again. No answer. By midnight, I was pacing the living room floor, the sound of the clock echoing against my chest. When he finally walked in, he looked calm, almost rehearsed, said he'd fallen asleep at the office, but the lie had a scent. Not his cologne, not cigarettes. It was her perfume, sweet, sharp, and unfamiliar, clinging to his jacket like a confession. I didn't say a word. Not that night. But something inside me quietly broke. Not into pain, into awareness. In the weeks that followed, he became a stranger who happened to wear my husband's face. He was restless, angry, easily irritated. He avoided eye contact, avoided touch. Money began disappearing from our account, and I found receipts for things I never bought. And then there was that name, LD Legal Associates, on his phone again and again. When I asked, he said it was business. But business doesn't make your voice tremble when you lie. So one evening, I did what I swore I'd never do. I followed him. He left just after 7. I waited 5 minutes, then took my car and drove behind him. He didn't go downtown to meet a client. He went to a small building with no signs, no lights, just a plain black door. I parked across the street and watched. He stepped out of his car, straightened his tie, and disappeared inside. My heartbeat was so loud I could barely breathe. An hour later, he came out, and he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him. Tall, blonde, elegant. She touched his arm as if it already belonged to her, and when she laughed, he smiled in a way I hadn't seen in years. That was the night I stopped being the wife who waited. That was the night I became someone else entirely. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I started collecting evidence, every message, every transaction, every inconsistency, because somehow I knew this wasn't just about cheating. He was hiding something deeper, something dangerous. 2 weeks later, the first letter came. It was from his lawyer. When I opened it, my hands went cold. It wasn't about divorce. It was an accusation, a claim that I had stolen company money from his firm, fraud, forgery, criminal charges. He was framing me, my own husband. I read the letter 3 times, trying to breathe through the panic. Every word was a knife. I called him. No answer. Called again. Nothing. Then a text. Just 6 words. "It's over, Claire. Don't fight this." That's when I understood. This wasn't heartbreak. This was war. He wasn't just leaving me. He wanted to erase me, and he thought I'd be too broken to fight back. But he forgot who I was before I became his wife. I was patient, observant, quiet, and I knew how to wait for the right moment. I hired a private investigator named Lena, sharp, discreet, and fearless. Within a week, she found what I'd suspected all along. He'd been stealing money from his company for years, millions. And to cover his tracks, he'd created fake accounts under my name. He wasn't trying to ruin me by accident. He planned it, every detail, every lie. When Lena showed me the proof, I didn't cry then, either. I just whispered, "Thank you," and started planning how to turn his trap inside out. The next few months were a blur of paperwork, signatures, and silence. While he and his lawyer tried to bury me, I was building a case behind their backs. Every document they sent became another piece of the puzzle I was quietly solving. When the prosecutor finally saw what we had, she smiled and said, "He thinks you're the defendant. Let's make him the one on trial." And just like that, the ground shifted. He didn't know it yet, but the woman he'd once dismissed as too soft was now the one who could end everything he'd built. The day before the trial, I stood by the window in our old house, watching the sunrise wash over the street. I thought about the first time he'd said he loved me, how genuine it had felt, and how lies, when repeated long enough, can start to sound like truth. Tomorrow, he would face everything he'd done, and I would be there, calm, silent, unshakable. He believed he had control. He believed his lawyer could bury the truth. But what neither of them knew was that I had one last move to play, one they'd never see coming, a surprise witness. And when she walked into that courtroom, my husband and his lawyer would finally realize the game was over. The morning of the trial arrived like a storm pretending to be calm. The city was quiet, the air heavy with the kind of silence that presses on your chest. I dressed carefully, a black suit, simple earrings, no perfume. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to remind him of the woman he thought he could break. When I reached the courthouse, the marble steps felt endless. Each one echoed under my heels like a heartbeat I couldn't slow down. Reporters stood by the entrance, whispering, cameras ready, sensing scandal. But I kept walking, eyes forward. I wasn't the story they were hoping for. Not yet. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. My attorney, Ms. Porter, met me with a firm nod. She was calm, the kind of calm that comes from knowing you hold the winning card. Still, she looked at me and said softly, "Whatever happens today, don't react. Let the silence speak for you." I took my seat at the defendant's table. Across the room he sat, my husband. Dark suit, perfect tie, that same smug expression I once mistook for confidence. Beside him, his lawyer whispered something, and they both smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. The judge entered, and the room rose. I kept my gaze low, steady, letting my breath find its rhythm. When we sat again, I finally looked up, and for a brief moment, he looked at me. Just 1 second. But in that second, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not regret, not guilt. Fear trying hard to hide behind arrogance. The prosecution began. Documents appeared, screens lit up, words filled the air. Fraud, misappropriation, forgery. All words meant to chain me to crimes I never committed. His lawyer spoke with the confidence of a man used to lying for money. He painted a picture of a desperate wife trying to secure her lifestyle. He said I'd betrayed the trust of a good man. A good man. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I remembered Miss Porter's words. Don't react. So I sat perfectly still, my face unreadable. Inside, I was counting every lie, every word he twisted, every time he used my name as a shield against his own sins. When my turn came, the prosecutor, a woman named Davis, rose slowly, her voice clear and steady. She didn't start with papers or numbers. She started with a story, my story. She spoke about a wife who believed in her husband, who trusted him enough to sign documents without question. She told the court how that trust was used as a weapon. Then she said, "Your Honor, we will prove that the real crime here was betrayal, not only of a woman, but of the law itself." His lawyer laughed under his breath. I saw my husband lean in and whisper, "They have nothing." But they were wrong. We had everything, and more. When Ms. Davis began to reveal the documents Lena and I had uncovered, the color drained from his face, just slightly, like the first hint of dawn before a full sunrise. Bank statements, forged signatures, offshore transfers, all with dates and details too perfect to dismiss. He shifted in his seat, tapping a pen against the table, his composure slipping. Still, he didn't know about the final piece, the one we'd kept hidden, the one that would change everything. The surprise witness. As the hours passed, the room turned thick with tension. Each objection, each rebuttal, was another spark in a room soaked in gasoline. I watched him closely. The way he adjusted his cufflinks, the way his jaw tightened when the prosecutor mentioned joint accounts. He was unraveling, quietly but surely. During recess, I stepped into the hallway. The cold air hit me like a warning. Lena stood there, leaning against the wall, hands in her coat pockets. She looked at me with that half-smile of hers and said, "Almost time." "Are you sure she's ready?" I asked. "She's been waiting for this moment longer than you have," Lena replied. Then she leaned in and whispered, "When she walks in there, everything changes." I didn't ask again. I just nodded. When court resumed, his lawyer grew bolder, louder even. He called me manipulative, said I was playing victim. He made the word wife sound like a weakness. Every sentence was crafted to make me small. But the thing about being broken once is that you stop fearing the cracks. When the prosecutor stood again, her voice was soft but sharp. She said, "The defense claims my client fabricated her story. We're about to prove she didn't. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call a witness." A hush fell over the courtroom. My husband's lawyer frowned. "This witness isn't on the list," he protested. The judge looked at Ms. Davis. "Is this truly necessary?" She nodded. "Essential, Your Honor." My husband shifted uncomfortably, whispering to his lawyer, "Who is it? Who did she find?" I sat perfectly still, eyes forward, because I knew that the next few seconds would destroy the illusion he'd built for years. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The sound echoed, loud and deliberate. Every head turned. The woman who walked in was calm, composed, and for a moment, even I forgot to breathe. She was the same woman I'd seen with him that night outside the black-doored building, the same woman who had laughed at his jokes, who had touched his arm like she owned him. But now, her expression was different. No laughter, no charm, just quiet resolve. He froze. His lawyer turned pale. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear crawl across my husband's face. Ms. Davis said, "Your Honor, this is Ms. Danielle Harper, the bookkeeper who managed the defendant's secret accounts." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Danielle took the stand, raised her hand, swore to tell the truth, and then she looked directly at my husband and said, "I was hired to help him move the stolen funds. But I didn't know he was blaming his wife for it, until now." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the judge leaned forward. My husband tried to interrupt. "She's lying." But his lawyer's hand shot out, warning him to stay quiet. It was too late. The damage had been done. I sat there, heart steady, eyes locked on the man who had tried to destroy me. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked small, cornered, exactly as I'd always imagined this moment would be. And still, it wasn't over. There was one more truth waiting to be revealed, one that would cut deeper than any betrayal before it. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, the kind that hums thick and electric, like the air before lightning strikes. Danielle sat on the witness stand, hands steady, eyes forward. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. We were both women who had once believed in the same man's lies. The prosecutor moved closer. "Ms. Harper, can you tell the court how you met Mr. Bennett?" Danielle's voice was soft but clear. "I met him 3 years ago. He came to my office asking for help managing a private account. He said it was for business investments, but he wanted everything kept off the record." The judge leaned forward slightly. "And did you?" "Yes," she said. "At first, I didn't know what he was doing, but soon I realized he was transferring company funds and using his wife's name to cover it." Every word landed like a stone dropping into still water. The ripples hit my husband first. He shifted in his seat, jaw tight, trying to hide his panic. His lawyer scribbled notes furiously, whispering under his breath. The prosecutor handed Danielle a document. "Is this the account statement you handled for him?" "Yes." "And whose name is listed as the authorized signature?" Danielle's eyes flicked toward me, just for a heartbeat, then back to the paper. "Claire Bennett." A murmur spread across the room. The judge tapped her gavel once. "Order." I kept my expression still, but inside my pulse thundered. There it was. Proof that he'd stolen my name, my trust, my life. Then Ms. Davis asked, "Ms. Harper, why are you testifying today?" Danielle hesitated. For a second, I saw the battle in her eyes. Fear, guilt, maybe shame. Then she said quietly, "Because I was part of it. Because he promised me things, money, a future, a life. And when it all fell apart, he told me I was disposable. He said if I ever spoke, he'd destroy me too." The words hung in the air like smoke. He finally snapped. "That's a lie," my husband shouted, standing up. "She's lying, Your Honor." The judge's gavel slammed. "Mr. Bennett, sit down." But it was too late. His voice cracked in the middle of the word lying. And in that small break, everyone in the room heard the truth. When he sat back down, his lawyer leaned close, whispering urgently. But I could see it now. The tremor in his hand, the sweat at his collar. The calm, confident man I once loved was gone. All that remained was the mask, and it was breaking. Danielle continued. "He used my access to move money through fake vendors. He forged his wife's name on every document. He told me she'd never find out because she trusted him completely." The prosecutor's voice was quiet. "And when she did find out?" Danielle looked down. "He tried to destroy her before she could destroy him." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't new information. I already knew it. But hearing it out loud, in front of strangers, in front of the world, it was like feeling the wound reopen. I took a breath, slow, steady, controlled. I wasn't here to crumble, not today. When the prosecutor finished her questions, the defense lawyer stood. He tried to sound confident. He tried to twist her words. "Ms. Harper, you admit you participated in this alleged fraud. Why should we believe you now?" She didn't flinch. "Because I have nothing left to lose," she said, "except the truth." For the first time since the trial began, even the lawyer had no response. He looked at my husband, hoping for some cue, but found only silence. Then the judge turned to the defense. "Mr. Bennett, would you like to take the stand?" His lawyer whispered something. He hesitated. Then, to my surprise, he stood. As he walked to the stand, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. He adjusted his jacket, smoothed his tie, as if neatness could erase guilt. When he sat down, he looked straight at me, not at the judge, not at the prosecutor, at me. For a moment, I almost saw the man I used to love. The one who held my hand when I was scared, the one who promised me forever. But then he opened his mouth, and all that was left was the liar. "She's doing this to punish me," he said, voice low, steady. "She couldn't handle losing control of me, so she made up this story. She and that witness," he pointed toward Danielle, "planned this together. They want my money. That's all this is." The prosecutor didn't even object. She didn't have to. Because as he spoke, something incredible happened. His confidence began to eat itself alive. He talked too much, too fast. The more he defended himself, the more he exposed the cracks in his own story. When Ms. Davis finally stood again, her tone was calm, almost gentle. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "can you explain why your signature appears on these offshore transfer forms when you just testified that you had no access to those accounts?" His mouth opened, then closed. He blinked, lost for words. I don't recall signing those." "But it's your signature." "Yes, I mean it looks like—" "Looks like yours?" she interrupted. "Or is yours?" He swallowed hard. "It's mine." The judge leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. The courtroom buzzed again. Every wall, every person seemed to lean in, waiting for the next crack. That was when Ms. Davis smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says the trap is complete. No further questions. He tried to speak again, but his lawyer grabbed his arm. It was over. He knew it. Everyone did. Still, I couldn't look away. Watching him sit there, defeated, I felt a strange mix of triumph and grief, because justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like standing over the ashes of something you once loved and realizing you lit the match yourself. The judge announced that the court would reconvene the next morning for closing statements. As the room began to empty, I stayed seated. My husband didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, eyes hollow. Danielle approached quietly, stopping beside my chair. She didn't speak right away. Then, softly, she said, "I'm sorry." I turned to her. "You didn't destroy my life," I said. "He did. You just helped me prove it." She nodded once, then walked away. And as she did, I realized she wasn't my enemy. She was my mirror. Another woman who had believed in the wrong man and was finally breaking free. Outside, the sky had turned gold with sunset. I stood on the courthouse steps, the same steps I'd climbed that morning. But this time, every echo of my heels felt different, not heavy with fear, but steady with purpose. Tomorrow, the verdict would come. Tomorrow, everything would end. But tonight, for the first time in years, I could finally breathe. The courthouse looked different that morning, brighter somehow, though the sky was still gray. Maybe it wasn't the light that changed. Maybe it was me. I arrived early. The halls were empty except for the echo of my own footsteps. In my hand, I carried nothing but a small notebook. My notes, my reminders, my strength. I didn't need more. Everything else had already been stripped away. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy. People whispered in corners, paper shuffled, cameras clicked quietly. But all I could hear was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. That sound would stay with me forever. When he walked in, his eyes found me immediately. He looked exhausted, a shadow of the man I once knew. His hair unkempt, his confidence gone. For the first time, I saw what guilt really looks like when it runs out of places to hide. He didn't nod, didn't smirk, didn't speak, just sat down beside his lawyer, eyes fixed on the table. The judge entered, and the murmurs stopped. Everyone rose, then sat. The gavel struck once, the sound that signals the end of pretending. Ms. Davis, the prosecutor, stood. Her closing argument was calm, steady, a slow dissection of everything he had built. She didn't dramatize, she didn't shout, she simply held up the truth and let it speak for itself. "Your Honor," she said, "this case was never just about money. It was about trust, the most valuable currency a person can hold. And Mr. Bennett spent his wife's trust like it was disposable." I watched the judge's face, stone, unreadable. Then the defense lawyer stood. He tried to twist the story again, to turn pity into a weapon. He talked about stress, about misunderstanding, about a man trying to save his marriage. Each word felt hollow. When he sat down, I could see in his eyes. Even he didn't believe it anymore. Then the judge spoke. His voice was low, deliberate. "I have heard enough." He looked at my husband, then at me. "Mr. Bennett, this court finds you guilty on all counts: fraud, falsification, and attempted defamation of your spouse's character." The room held its breath. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the floor as if the verdict might change if he refused to hear it. The judge continued, "You will be remanded into custody pending sentencing." 2 officers stepped forward, and that was when he finally turned to me. For a moment, everything disappeared. The crowd, the whispers, the flashing cameras. It was just us. 2 people who once promised forever, now standing on opposite sides of truth. He whispered something, so faint I almost missed it. "Claire, please." It wasn't anger. It wasn't denial. It was desperation. The last note of a song long dead. I didn't respond. Because what could I say to a man who'd tried to bury me with his lies? I just looked. At him. Not with hatred, not with triumph, but with the kind of quiet clarity that comes when you finally see a person exactly as they are. They led him out in handcuffs. The sound of metal against fabric echoed in the still air. People began to move, voices rose again, chairs scraped against the floor. But I sat there for a moment longer, letting the weight of it settle. Lena appeared beside me. "You did it," she said softly. I shook my head. "No," I said. "The truth did." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Questions flew from every direction. "What will you do now?" "How does it feel?" I walked straight through them, silent, because this story wasn't theirs to tell. It was mine. When I reached my car, I paused before getting in. The city sounded different that day, like it had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I looked up at the gray sky and thought of all the mornings I'd made his coffee, all the nights I'd waited for a man who was already gone. Now, finally, I wasn't waiting anymore. As I drove home, memories played like old film reels, our first date, our wedding, the laughter that once filled our kitchen. All of it felt like someone else's life. Someone who still believed love was enough to save a person from who they really are. That evening, I walked through my house, quiet, still, familiar in a new way. I took off my shoes, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the window. The sun was setting, painting gold across the walls. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long: peace. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. Justice had been served, yes, but healing would take time. And truth, once it's spoken, doesn't stop echoing. Because even as the night settled in, I could still hear his last word: "Please." It wasn't forgiveness he wanted. It was the illusion of control, one last time. And I'd finally learned how to live without giving it. They say when a storm ends, everything looks clearer. But they never tell you how strange the silence feels afterward. For weeks after the trial, I lived in that silence. No lawyers, no calls, no more questions. Just me, the hum of my refrigerator, and the ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall. Sometimes I would catch myself listening for his car in the driveway, even though I knew he would never come back. Habit is a powerful thing. It lingers long after love has left. I didn't rush to fill the space he'd left behind. I let it breathe. I learned that healing doesn't always look like moving on. Sometimes it looks like standing still long enough to remember who you are. I started walking every morning, just around the block at first. The same streets I'd driven down 1,000 times suddenly felt new. The air smelled different. The world looked softer. And for the first time, I began to feel grateful for the quiet. One day, I stopped at the cafe near the courthouse, the same one I used to sit in before every hearing. The barista still remembered my order. "Double espresso, right?" she said with a smile. I smiled back. "Not anymore. Just tea." It surprised me how simple that moment felt, how it marked the end of a chapter I never wanted to write, but somehow needed to finish. At home, I found the old wedding photo we'd packed away years ago. There we were, smiling, young, full of plans. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize myself. So I did something unexpected. I didn't throw it away. I placed it in a drawer and closed it gently. Not to hold on, but to remind myself of the woman who believed in forever, and the woman who learned that forever can change. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the noise inside me began to fade. People kept asking if I was angry, if I wanted revenge, if I'd ever forgive him. But anger is heavy, and I'd carried enough weight for one lifetime. Revenge never builds anything, it only burns. And forgiveness isn't a gift for the guilty, it's freedom for the broken. So one morning, I drove to the lake, our favorite place before everything fell apart. The water was still, the air cool, the sky painted in soft pinks and blues. I stood at the edge and whispered everything I'd never said in court. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." The words drifted into the wind, and I swear the world exhaled with me. That night I slept through till morning for the first time in years. No nightmares, no courtroom echoes, just quiet. I've learned that truth doesn't destroy you, lies do. Truth rebuilds you, one painful piece at a time. It tears away the false, so the real can finally breathe. And maybe that's why the surprise witness had to happen, not to punish him, but to save me. Because if there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. Sometimes the person you love most becomes your greatest lesson, and sometimes the end you fear the most is the beginning you needed all along. Now, when I look at my reflection, I don't see the woman who was betrayed. I see the woman who survived her own silence, who stood in a courtroom of lies and refused to disappear, who walked out with her head held high and her heart, finally, her own. I still keep that small notebook. Its pages are full now, not with evidence or notes, but with little things I want to remember. Sunrise over the lake, the smell of tea instead of coffee, the sound of my own laughter, unshaken. And at the very end of the book, I wrote one last line. "The truth may hurt, but it never leaves you empty. It leaves you clean." Because in the end, the real victory isn't in the courtroom. It's in the quiet moments after, when you realize you no longer need to prove your worth to anyone, not to him, not to the world, just to yourself. So if you ever find yourself sitting in the dark, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, remember this: the truth will always walk in, right when the liars think they've won. And when it does, let it. Let it break you. Let it set you free. Because that's how healing begins, not with revenge, but with release. And maybe, just maybe, that's what love was always meant to teach us.